All right. So if you have a podcast and you're trying to grow it, or you're thinking about starting a podcast and you want to make sure you can launch it in the top 100, then you're going to absolutely love this episode. When we launched our podcast 3 or 4 years ago, I didn't know what I was doing. We just kind of read some blogs online and just went for it. And because we had a built-in audience already, we were able to leverage that audience, get it into the top 40 of like business and marketing categories on iTunes. And we've been growing ever since. However, there are some questions that come up from our audience of like, well, what if I launch it and then I'm plateaued in views or downloads? What do I do? Or what if I don't have an audience and I can't leverage an audience when I'm going so I can get in the top 100? What do I do? Well, today's episode, we dive into all of that, everything from how to launch, how to create content, how to keep the process or the momentum going, even after your launch, and more. We have a special guest coming on who specializes in launching podcasts in the top 100. So I can't wait to dive into this episode. So if that's interesting to you, well, keep on listening. Hi, I'm Brandon Lucero, and you're about to experience the new way to thrive in business, entrepreneurship, and life by leaning into who you are, what you love, and standing up for what you want to create. Get ready, because this is where we go against the grain, say no to outdated society norms, and we say yes to change in order to create a happier, more fulfilled world. Welcome to the New Generation Entrepreneur Podcast. Hello, everyone, and welcome back to another episode of the New Generation Entrepreneur Podcast. I'm really excited for today's interview. Yes, it is an interview. We're not doing a solo this week, but I'm really excited for this topic because I started my business basically on YouTube, doing video, short form, long form video. And then about 3 to 4 years ago, we started this podcast, and this podcast has been our number one content platform. Almost all of our customers come in through the podcast. There's listeners of the podcast. They've heard an episode. In my opinion, podcasting has been one of the best content methods, platforms, or processes in growing our business. And I haven't really talked about much of how we did it or what to do if you want to grow a podcast. So I decided to bring on an expert on launching, scaling, and growing a podcast. So today we have Courtney Elmer from the Effortless Life. She's the founder of Effortless Life, creator of Pod Launch, the Pod Launch program. So Courtney, welcome to the podcast.
Brandon, thank you for having me. I am super pumped to be here. I have to say, I've been really looking forward to this conversation, especially since we had to reschedule it last week and we're finally here, and I'm like pumped up for this.
Yeah, I'm excited too. Yeah, we did. It was crazy. Last week was crazy. I got stuck in like 3 hours of traffic when I was 3 miles from my house and had to cancel, but I'm glad we're here. Glad we're chatting. Let's just start with the basics. Can you just let everyone know like what it is you do and how you help and who you help and all that good stuff?
Absolutely. Totally. So like you mentioned, I'm the founder of the Effortless Life and the creator of Pod Launch. And inside of that program, what we do is we help entrepreneurs stop spinning their wheels on social media and walk them through how to launch and leverage a top 1% podcast that positions them as an in-demand thought leader in their niche and allows them to reach a wider audience with their message and drive more traffic and sales back to their business. So that's like the nutshell version of what we do. And I know we're going to get into a lot of that today, but Brandon, I have to be honest with you, this is not something I ever in a million years imagined I would be teaching.
Why is
totally.
that?
Well, when I started my business, it was about 7 years ago. And I just entered in the space, life coaching, right? It was very broad. It was very general. I didn't have anything dialed in as to what I wanted to do, but I knew I needed to leave the corporate world. And prior to that, about 5 years prior to that or so, I had met the love of my life. We had gotten engaged, we got married, planned our wedding. And at the time I was working in corporate. I was, typical 9 to 5. I was bringing work home with me on the weekends. I was working through my lunch breaks and I was doing everything to climb that corporate ladder. And by the world standards, I was super successful. I had the nice car and I had the title and I had a flexible schedule and just different things that, we measure our success by. And we got home from our honeymoon and went in for a follow-up visit with my doctor. I had had a sinus infection a couple weeks before, and he was like, look, go do the wedding, come back, come see me after you get back. And we'll go over your test results, make sure everything's good. So he sits me down that day, and I'm getting like this weird vibe from him, because usually he was chatty, he was friendly, and today he was kind of standoffish. And I'm like, what is going on? And he looks at me, and he looks down in his folder, and he looks at me again. He's like, Courtney, we got your test results back, and really this falls completely beyond the scope of my expertise. So I'm turning your case over to a colleague of mine who specializes in this sort of thing. She's here today. She'll be here in a moment. I'll introduce you. So I'm sitting there like, what is going on? So this other doctor walks in the room, and she sits down and she looks at me and she said, Courtney, you have thyroid cancer. Brandon, I was 25 years old, 2 days after we got home from our honeymoon.
Oh my God.
And she's like, the good news is that it's very treatable. The bad news is yours has started to spread. It's a more aggressive type. We need to operate as soon as possible. I have cleared a spot for you on my schedule next Monday. This was less than a week away. She's like, I'll see you at 7 a.m. Monday morning. Yes.
Whoa.
Completely out of left field. So fast forward, go through treatment, go through recovery. And that was the first time, quite honestly, maybe ever, that I had to stop. I had to slow down and evaluate my life. I know this is going to sound so cliche, but that moment was clearer than ever how short and how fragile life is. And one of the things that was painfully obvious to me was that I needed to stop working for someone else. I had always dreamed of becoming an entrepreneur. I had always dreamed of doing my own thing. I had no idea what that would look like or how that would take shape. But that was the moment for me, that catalyst moment that I was like, I've got to do something different. And I wish I could say that I walked away from that experience and my life completely changed and everything was amazing after that. But the reality is I went back to corporate world for a while because I was so afraid. I was so afraid to start my own thing. I was so afraid of judgment, of rejection, of other people's opinions, all the things that we face when we get into business for ourselves. And so it took me a couple of years, but I finally pulled the trigger and opened Courtney Elmer Coaching. It was nothing more to it than that at that point. And I guess I had always envisioned, just using my gifts and my strengths of speaking, of writing, systems. I have a background in systems. I have a background in psychology. And so I just threw myself full force into the world of coaching. I just was so on fire to help people transform their life and break free from beliefs that were holding them back and help them input better systems in their business. And that has evolved very much so over the past 7 years that I've been running this company. But podcasting was never on the radar. Never. Up until about 3 years ago. 3 years ago, it was right before everything shut down for the pandemic. And I had this seed planted. This was mid 2019. So about 6 months or so prior to that. And I remember at the time, my son was about 18 months old. And he was home with me full time. So I had just started this business like a year before. I was trying to grow this business, and I was trying to grow it in the nooks and crannies of the day. When he would take a nap, I would check my email and create some content. He would take his next nap and I'd come and I'd do some client stuff. And I can remember walking our neighborhood because that was the only hands-free time that I would get. I'd put them in the stroller, I'd strap them in and pop my AirPods in, and I would listen to podcasts because I was trying to figure out, well, you could call it a shortcut, if you will, right? But I just wanted to do anything and everything that I could to gain traction, to get traffic. Leads were coming in so inconsistently. Revenue was all over the place. There was no predictability. And it was driving me crazy because my time was already so limited. And I was noticing, I'm posting on social media 3, 4, 5, 6 times a week. It's driving no sales. I'm getting barely any comments. 1, 2 people would comment. A few people would like stuff. It's like my true fans, they'd always like and, comment something. But it wasn't the people that I was really here trying to reach, trying to help. And one day it just dawned on me, and I'm kind of embarrassed it took me so long to realize this. But Brandon, I'm listening to these podcasts. And this thought just popped in my head, why don't you do this? Why not a podcast? If these people, these experts who have all of this knowledge have literally built their own stage and they're here connecting every week with their listeners, teaching them, giving them that knowledge. It was like a window into their world. I felt like I knew these hosts, even though I'd never met them, and probably never will meet them in real life. And so that just got my wheels turning, and the rest is history. I mean, we could dive into as much as you want from there, but that's really the background of, you know, what was and what really led me now to podcasting and to teaching this to other entrepreneurs. What a powerful platform it is.
Yeah. I mean, I love that. I love the story. I mean, I didn't know about the cancer thing. And that's like, I mean, you just can't imagine getting married, going on a honeymoon. You're on the, like, I mean, talk about highs and lows. Like you go from the highest of the highs to the lowest of the lows. I mean, it's pretty brutal. And then even like starting the business and then finding your way here. And it reminds me of my story a little bit, of at least the business side of it, because like, there's no way in a million years I ever thought I'd be teaching messaging. That was like, you know, like English was my worst subject in school. Like I have terrible grammar, but like I'm teaching language, communication, copy, messaging. And so you just never know where life's going to take you. I also love the fact that you snuck this in between like the walks and the, like the naps and all that stuff. Cause, I remember growing my business, and it was like right when Will, my first, was born, and I would take nighttime duty. So I'd work at night while he was like in his rocker sleeping. And then I would give him like a bottle or something like that if he woke up in the middle of the night. And that's what I had to do. It's like, I had to work from like 8 o'clock to 3 a.m, because those were the hours. Then I would watch him during the day while my wife went to work. And so it's just funny, like being a parent, you find these little windows as pockets, and you just make it work. So I can relate to a lot of what you went through, and I'm sure a lot of the listeners can as well. What I would love to dive into is kind of, you know, like, you know, obviously you've kind of learned how to launch and scale and grow podcasts through your own journey. I would love to hear a little bit about what was your experience like when you first started, like you made that decision, I'm going to start my podcast. What were some of the roadblocks and hurdles that you had to like overcome when you first got started?
What was interesting about this is that I had no idea how to start a podcast. Absolutely none. All I had known prior to that was social media, you know, post short form content, you know, fit what you need to say into a 100-word caption, fit what you need it, you know, into a 7-second video or 15-second video. And I love to speak. I loved the idea of podcasting, but I dragged my feet on this idea for a really long time because I had no idea where to begin. So I was actually at BBD Live. I was the case study winner for James Wedmore's program. And yes, in 2019.
That's awesome.
And one of the prizes was like sitting on this amazing leather couch down in the front of the event. There's like 600 plus people there. And so everyone knew me as the girl on the couch. So I had tons of people coming up and introducing themselves to me throughout this event. And one guy walks up and he's like, "Hey, I'm so-and-so. You know, I have a podcast. Have you ever considered having a podcast?" And I'm like, "Well, it's funny that you say that. Yes, I would love to, but I have no idea where to start." And he's like, "Oh my gosh, you totally need to do it. Look, after this event, let's hook up. We'll have a Zoom meeting, just chat a little bit. You know, I'll walk you through kind of what I did to get started. If it helps you out, great. You know, I would love to help you." So I'm like, yes. So I hop on this Zoom meeting with this guy. Didn't really know him outside of this event. You know, we chatted for like an hour, and I'm sitting there just furiously taking notes. And what I walked away with from that conversation, Brandon, was the number one thing surprised me. And it had nothing to do with the tech, had nothing to do with the mic setup or, you know, all of these obstacles that in my head were obstacles, you know, how much time it was going to take and all of these things. It was really about my why for podcasting and what I wanted to get out of the podcast. And so in that moment, I got crystal clear on why I was doing this, you know, and for me, it was to create deeper connection with my community and go deeper in a way that I couldn't on social media. And what I wanted to get out of it, obviously, was exposure for my business. You know, I didn't have hard and fast numbers to say I want X amount of, you know, leads coming in per month from this. And certainly we developed those goals since then. But really, I just wanted to be able to have a way to feel like my message mattered, to feel like I could reach people with that message. And that I wasn't just over here as this unheard expert, someone who knows a lot about a lot of things, but that nobody knew that I knew anything about those things, right? So those were the two things that really were the spark that I needed to set things in motion. I hired an editor because, again, my son was home. I knew that was not something I could do behind the scenes myself. Started recording, and we launched our show. This was February of 2020. Within about 48 hours, we had over 65 five-star reviews come in for the podcast.
Wow.
Yes. I didn't even know about charting at the time. You know, there's all these tools now that you can hook your podcast up to see when you chart and where in the world you chart and what categories you chart, right? I had no idea about that. We got thousands of downloads. And I was just so thrilled because I had never had any sort of marketing thing take off like that. So that really encouraged me. And shortly after that, people were reaching out, like my network. They were like, Courtney, how did you do that?
Right.
What did you do? Tell me what you did. So I just started sharing what I did with people. To me, it wasn't rocket science. We leveraged our existing community in support of the show. And I can go into more detail about what that looks like specifically and how we did that. But we rallied our existing community behind us. And it created this incredible energy, this incredible connection. People were excited about the show. And it was so fulfilling and satisfying for me as a business owner to finally feel like I was reaching people, like I was making a difference, you know? So I had enough people reaching out that they were like, tell me what you did. Tell me what you did. I'm like, look, I'm going to put all of you in a room. We're going to meet for 6 weeks on Zoom. I'm going to walk you through exactly what I did. And if it works for you, great. And that officially became the first beta version of what is now Pod Launch.
Oh, I love
because
that.
I walked everyone through what I did. They went out, they got better results than I did.
That's awesome.
There was one guy, he's a trademark attorney. And I'm like, oh, I don't know how this is going to go. Attorney, trademark, it's kind of boring, you know, like, I don't know how this is going to be podcasting, you know. He got over 100 5-star reviews when he launched. He landed like number 34 in business or something ridiculous. Like that is one of the most competitive categories. And he came back to me after and he said, Courtney, we had our best month in sales ever this month. And I am certain it was because of this launch and just the buzz that this podcast has generated for us. Yeah. That's when I knew I was onto something. So it was mind blowing to me because, again, this is never something I saw myself doing or teaching, but all the pieces really fell into place. And I quickly realized that what I thought were obstacles, like the time and the tech and those kinds of things, were surprisingly a lot easier to navigate and figure out than I had anticipated. Yeah. And this was one of the most fun projects I had ever, to that point, launched in my business. And it was exciting.
Well, and that's, I think, today's day and age too. There's just so much more software and tools available, and the ease of the tech is so much easier now than it was, 3-4 years ago. I don't know if it's common or rare for someone just to all of a sudden get 65 5-star reviews, especially when they're just like throwing something up there and not really sure what they do. So I know you're very strategic with how to do that now. I would love to dive into, how does someone actually launch the podcast? How do you get those reviews? Because I know you have 3 pillars when it comes to a podcast. It's you have like how to create high converting content, you need a launch strategy, and then you need like an ongoing process as well. And so I'd love to, I don't know if it'd make more sense to dive into like how to create high converting content or launch. Actually, let's just dive into launch strategy. Like, what does someone need to do in order to launch that like top 1% podcast? I know reviews are important, but I'm sure there's other things too. Can you just walk us through sort of like a checklist of what to do and how to do it?
Totally. So let me clear up a little misconception that out there, surrounding reviews, downloads. What does that mean? How does it impact the podcast? How does it impact your rankings? Mm-hmm. So I look at reviews as social proof for the show. What do we do when we go look at a product on Amazon, right? We read the reviews. When we're looking at a new book and whether it's worth reading or not, right? Is this worth our time to read? We're going to read the reviews first. Same with the podcast. Listeners are out there. If they're searching for a new podcast, what they're likely going to do before they listen to a single episode is they're going to scroll down and see how many reviews that show has. Mm-hmm. So I want to be clear that the reviews don't carry as much weight for the ranking as people think that they do, but they carry a lot of weight when it comes to the social proof and credibility of your show.
I see.
Because we don't, it's totally unconscious. It's not like we're sitting there logically going, let me see if this show's, worth my time. Right. But if other people like it, right, it's when a piece of content goes viral, it's the same thing because a million other people like this. Well, therefore I better pay attention to this, right? And maybe like it too. So that's the purpose of the reviews. Downloads, though, directly impact rankings.
Okay.
And so the way that the Apple algorithm works, Apple might not want me telling all of everyone this right now, but the way that it works, and this is something you could Google, but the way that this works is that however many downloads a particular show receives in a given window of time, usually about 24 hours or so, that will determine the ranking of that show.
I see.
So this is why for some of the biggest shows that are out there, and I like to use Andrew Huberman as an example, because he is one of the top podcasts of all time right now. He's usually in like the number one spot of all podcasts, all categories. And he's got a very popular show. Now, when he releases an episode, all of his listeners who are following the show, most of them, that episode will automatically download. That counts as a download. And what that does is it tells Apple, hey, there's a lot of demand for this person's content. So we want to push this up higher in our chart so that more people see it. It's very similar to when a post goes viral on social media, right? Because it gets a lot of people liking it, a lot of people, all that traffic in that condensed window of time. The algorithm assumes, hey, this is popular. People like it. Let's show it to more people.
Yeah.
So yeah, it works much the same way. So when I went to launch my podcast, I recognized that going in, that reviews and downloads were super important. And so I decided to treat it much like I would launch a program where you've got a runway, right? There's a period where you're getting the word out, you're creating buzz around what it is you're doing. You're telling people why you're doing it, why they should care, right? How this is going to solve a problem for them. Yep. And then what I did was I asked for people's commitment to review and download the episodes that I released on launch day. And I just picked an arbitrary day, and now I know how to actually go in and research and like pick the best day to launch. Right. I didn't know that at the time. But I was like, look, here's the day that we're launching. I'm going to release these episodes. It would mean the world to me if you could support the show. And all you got to do to support the show is download the episodes that you see and leave a review, a genuine review. Because either you're someone who knows me, and so this is a character reference, or please listen to the episodes and give me your feedback. Let me know your feedback. So all very integrity based.
Right.
And what was mind blowing to me was the amount of support that our community gave. Like they came out of the woodwork. So I had never had that much support for any launch, right? And what was different about this was I wasn't selling anything. There was no, price attached. I wasn't asking anyone to buy anything. Right. But the way that I communicated this and created this buzz for this show, it was essentially creating that demand for it.
Yeah.
And people got wind of that and they got excited about it. And the way I was communicating was how this podcast was going to solve very real problems in their life and in their business. So it was something that they wanted. I was creating that desire, that demand.
I love that.
So
I'm going to add one thing to that, because it's the process of what you did and how you bring people through inside of pod launches. It reminds me a lot of even how we launched just like a program where I'm always tell people like pick a date. And it's just like a movie release. You just want to, here's the date, here's what to expect, here's what it's going to do for you. And we do that all the time. So now people are like chanting like, oh, March 18th, like I'm ready for March 18th. And it's like, you just create this like buzz around the launch. But what I love about what you did too, is you set the expectations of what you wanted beforehand. It was like, okay, we're going to do this and here's what you need to do, and download and leave the review so people are prepared and prepped for it. My question to you is actually like, what happens if someone doesn't have an audience? Because like when someone has an audience, like it's very easy to do that. Is there anything you can do if you're just starting from like ground zero, or is it kind of like, well, you just have to do the best you can do? Like, is there anything like strategically that they can do if they don't have an audience right now?
Yes. I'm so glad you asked this, because we've actually worked with clients who are like, I am just starting in business. I have 0 people on my email list. I have like 50 people following me on social media. Mm-hmm. So can I start a podcast? Is it the right time to start a podcast? Should I wait to start my podcast, till I have more experience and expertise and I know what I'm talking about, right? And I mean, you can argue one way or another. Yeah, you should have your message totally dialed in before you start a podcast. Oh, sure, I can see a case for that. But at the same time, I also see a very, very compelling case for having a podcast as the cornerstone of your marketing before you even start to grow a social media platform, because of how quickly it will help you dial in your message and reach people at the same time. So I just say that to preface what I'm going to say next, because we have had a couple of clients, one in particular who comes to mind. She had just started her coaching business and she was very nervous. She knew she wanted a podcast. Like she knew she wanted to do this,
Right.
but she was afraid that, just like you said, like they would launch it and then like, I have no audience. This is going to flop. It's going to be a failure. It's going to be a total waste of my time.
Right.
And so what we encouraged her to do was to reach out to people in her network outside of her business. Go back to friends, family, contacts and colleagues that you have, maybe from, previous companies that you've worked with, Facebook groups that you're a member of, right? Who else in, are you part of any coaching programs? Is there people that you've met there that you could reach out to and kind of expand the radius of your network, so to speak, where if you don't have a community of people who already know, like, and trust you and would be willing to support you, then go outside of that to people who already know you and would be willing to support you just because you're you, right? Because they have a respect for you. And so that's what she did. And she broke the top 100.
Whoa, that's awesome.
In the Apple charts.
Yeah.
When she launched. And we were all like cheering. We were like, this is awesome. You did it. Oh my gosh, we knew you could make it happen, and she did. She just committed to the process and she saw it through. And she didn't let that stop her. She didn't let that be the thing that kept her, not taking action on this dream of hers.
Right.
And she couldn't have been more thrilled with the results. And she told me after the fact, this was like a few months later, she was like, Courtney, had I not launched the podcast when I did, she said, all these opportunities that I'm getting now for speaking engagements and client inquiries and workshops to be teaching in other people's masterminds and all this kind of stuff that was coming her way. It was like all these doors suddenly opened. Yeah. She said that would have never happened had I not done this when I did. So amazing. She was so grateful.
Yeah. And that's the thing too, is like, I think when we launched, we were in the top, I think we hit top 40 in like business or marketing or something like that, but we had like a pre-done audience. But something we did, and you let me know if you think this is not a great strategy, but even if you don't have an audience, what we did is we just interviewed people on the podcast and then gave them, like, I actually created the content for them that they could share on their socials. So like, obviously I have a good sized network. So we had like Rick Mulready and James Wedmore and like Jim Fortin, and then they would share it with their audience as well. But I would imagine if you don't have an audience yet, and even if you just go to people who have a following, like maybe don't have a business wrapped around their following, like influencers, because they don't really make any money. And you're like, hey, if I give you like $100, interview you, give you exposure, would you share this content with your audience? Like I would imagine they would probably do it. Do you think that would be an okay thing to do? Have you done something similar to that before?
I haven't personally. We've had some clients who have, and really what I go back to, Brandon, is what feels an integrity for you.
Yeah.
Right. Because that's one of my core values. And so that's what I teach. I mean, it's infused throughout our entire program. Everything we teach is not just about the numbers.
Right.
Those are important. They do help you get traction. But the two other pieces of the pillars that we haven't even dove into yet are what actually creates the long-term growth.
Okay. Well, let's dive into that.
Okay.
How do we
I was just going to say,
sure.
Well, the launch piece though, yes, certainly it's important. And yes, you could potentially do like some kind of brand sponsorship deal, but my only, thing that I want to just make sure is crystal clear for people here is please stay in integrity. Don't do anything just to get downloads or numbers. That's kind of like buying followers on Instagram, right? We know that doesn't work. But if you are truly creating some kind of partnership with someone, or like you did, where it was like you had these people in your network, that's almost like an affiliate thing, right? Hey, if you would promote this for me, it really would mean a lot. There's nothing wrong with that. So get creative and stay in integrity.
Love it. Okay, cool. And that's great to know too. I actually thought that reviews had a heavier weight than they did than the downloads. But now that I think about it, it makes sense because we're on like Chartable and stuff like that. And I can see us popping into like top 200, top 1 from time to time in different countries. And I always thought like, we didn't get any reviews recently. I don't understand how that's happening, but obviously it's because of the downloads. So that makes a lot of sense.
Because of downloads.
Yeah.
Yeah.
All right. Let's dive into the content. I would love to hear your thoughts on like what makes really good podcast content, what people can do and all that good stuff.
This is honestly my favorite pillar. We'd be here a long time, Brandon. We'd be here as long as you want talking about this one. This is something that most people who start podcasts give very little regard to. I call it your high converting content system, and it's pillar one of our strategy because this is the foundation upon which your entire show should rest. Because what'll happen, and this is what most people do. They think, okay, if I can buy a high quality microphone, figure out how to plug it in and where to hit record, and then figure out how to get that show published, if my content's good enough, then my show will take off. People will listen. Logical, right? Makes logical sense.
Yep.
But in the world of podcasting, what most people don't realize is that before someone can get to your incredible content inside of your episode, they've got to go through several content gatekeepers. I call them content gatekeepers. There's 4 main content gatekeepers that they have to go through first before they even press play on your episode.
Yeah.
And I'll walk through what those are in a moment. But I will say this, if you don't have those gatekeepers, metaphorically speaking, if those gates are not wide open and literally leading your listener to the play button and compelling them and convincing them of why they should click play and give you their valuable time to listen, then you're going to constantly and continually struggle to grow your podcast because you'll be losing listeners to your competition.
Okay.
So in order to prevent that from happening, we got to look at these gatekeepers. So what they are is your title of your show, your cover art, your show description, your episode titles, and also your show notes. That kind of goes within the episode itself. So these elements are all pieces of content, if you will, that a potential listener will look at. And I hate to use this word, but judge your show based on.
Right.
Now, it's completely unconscious. They're not logically scrolling there going like, oh, this cover art is, using the most amazing colors and it's standing out in the feed. And therefore I'm going to listen to the show, right? It's totally not logical.
Yeah.
But if you notice, go to any category, and I'm going to use Field as an example. If you go to look at the marketing episodes that are out there, right? The marketing category, and you're scrolling the top, on your phone, it shows anywhere from the top 50 to top 100 shows. And you're scrolling through that and you're looking for things, to listen to. You're going to look at a couple of things. You're going to notice the cover art first.
Right.
In fact, I should say your unconscious mind will notice that first because your eye is going to be drawn to certain artwork over others. And if I were to pull up a screenshot of Amy's cover art alongside the other 9 episodes right there in the top 10 with her, all the other 9 podcasts, the other 9 podcasts have very warm visuals, oranges, hot pinks, yellows, bold text. And some of them, have pictures of the host on it. Some of them don't. That doesn't really matter. But hers is the only one that's different. And I would be willing to bet it's intentionally different. Her title is Online Marketing Made Easy. She's already appealing to her ideal listener's number one pain point. She's clearly communicating what that show is about. Her listeners don't have to guess to try to figure out, what is the show about? Is this going to be worth my time?
Right.
And visually, she stands out in the feed because unlike the other podcasts that are all these warm colors, hers is very minimal. It's got a light gray background. She's wearing this blue shirt and her text on her screen is very clear, her title and her name. And it immediately draws your eye towards it. And that's just 2 gatekeepers right there, right? So if someone is drawn into your cover art and the title, because the title is important. I mean, there's 20,000 Hertz. I mean, it is a popular podcast, but if you don't know what it's about, are you really going to take the time to go figure out what that's about, right? Like, I wouldn't. I'd be like, I don't even know what that is. Let's just scroll past. So the name's super important too, especially if you're an entrepreneur and you're using this as a traffic strategy.
Right.
So those are the 2 gatekeepers.
And when you say title, you're talking about the title of the podcast, right? Because then there's the episode
title
titles.
of the podcast.
Okay, got it.
Yes. Because what is our user habits, right? If we see something that appeals to us, we're going to click. And the next thing we're going to do is we're going to read that podcast description.
Yeah. Okay.
That's the third gatekeeper.
Yep.
So that has to be super dialed in to clearly communicate what problems that your show is here to solve.
Okay.
And also the transformation that someone will get when they listen.
Gotcha.
It's basic marketing 101, but it has to be clearly communicated. You know, I've seen a lot of descriptions that either they're very long and they ramble on and on and on, right? They don't get to the point. Some of them include like the full bio of the host. I'm like, come on, nobody is reading that. You know, it should be a paragraph at the most, right? It's got to be clear. It's got to be compelling. People are skimming.
Yeah.
So if they get past that gatekeeper, the next thing they're going to see are your episode titles.
Okay. And I just want to add one thing too, real quick, because, you know, the importance of this, I think a lot of people overlook is like, look, if you're going to launch and you're going to get all these like floods of downloads, you're going to get all these like reviews and you're going to move up the algorithm and maybe you get into the top 100, that's going to give you exposure to cold people, new people. And if you're not optimizing that exposure, it's just like running a Facebook ad that has a crappy creative and crappy copy. It's not going to work. So you might as well, and I'll be honest, like when we launched, I overlooked all of this. I was like as you're going through, I'm like, wow, the title of this podcast sucks. I'm like, maybe my cover art needs some work. So this is all like great information, honestly, that I wish I would have had when we launched. But I love it. So let's dive into the description. I'd love to hear what you have to say.
Yeah. Yeah. I will just add to that, Brandon. I made the same mistake. I named our podcast has evolved. We rebranded it since I first launched it, but it was originally called the Effortless Life Podcast. And that's the name of my company. Mm-hmm. But if you don't know what that stands for and who I am and what I stand for and what effortless truly means, as I relate it in the entrepreneurial context, that means absolutely nothing. I mean, someone could see that and be like, what is this podcast on, you know, how to become a Buddhist monk on the side of a mountain? Like, what is that? You know, nobody knows. Right. So yeah, it's got to be clear. But to the description, you know, that's the next thing that people are going to read. And then if that creates enough curiosity, what are they going to do next? They're going to scroll through your recent episodes. Mm. And so that's where the titles come into play.
I see.
And so if your titles are super long and they're getting cut off by Apple, it's one thing to take into consideration. Another thing is the title clear? Is it compelling? You know, think about an email subject line. Mm-hmm. It's going to directly determine whether or not someone opens and reads that email.
Right.
And it functions the same way. So if they get past the title and they find one that's like, okay, that I'm interested in that, they're going to click and then they're going to see the description for the episode.
Yep.
And then and only then, if they have made it through all those gatekeepers, will they click play.
Gotcha.
And actually listen to your content. But here's another mistake that a lot of people make. Mm-hmm. Is that within the episode, they're not structuring their content to create desire and demand for the call to action at the end of the episode. If they give a call to action. Oh my gosh, some people don't even do it. I'm like, what? You're missing out on all of these potential leads. Like, how could you not be doing this, right? But then other hosts will get frustrated because they are giving a call to action, but nobody's taking action. And so the structure within the episode itself matters too, because you've got to be able to lead your listener on a journey, essentially, in that 10 minutes, 20 minutes, 45 minutes, however long it is, to get them wanting what you're going to offer them, whether that's, you know, come join me for this workshop or download this PDF or book a call with me or whatever that might be. Right. So I spell all of this out not to intimidate anyone, Brandon, but also to let people know, like, you have to be thinking about these things, specifically if you're an entrepreneur who wants to leverage a podcast to drive traffic to your business. Because just like you said with the Facebook ad, such a good example, like it's not going to work if all of these little pieces aren't dialed in.
Yeah. Well, it makes sense too. And I don't think it should sound overwhelming to anyone. Because here's the thing is, like, if you guys are going to start a podcast, you're going to have to create a title anyways. You're going to have to create a cover art. You're going to have to create a description. You're going to have to come up with episode titles. What Courtney's talking about, like, these are things you're going to have to do, whether you do them good or bad. Like, you might as well just do it good and from the beginning and not get overwhelmed with any of it, because honestly, it's gonna be overwhelming whether you do a good job with it or a bad job with it. So what are some like tips that you can give on structuring the episode to create that demand or that desire. Because as you know, it's like one of my favorite subjects is talking about how to create content and communication and messaging that does that. And I feel like we've been getting better and better on our podcast, but I'd love to hear your tips and kind of recommendations of how someone else can do that.
Totally. And I love this too, because this is where I really get to lean on my background in psychology and apply that, here for your listener, this ideal person that you're looking to attract.
Yeah.
And what's keeping them awake at night, right? What are the beliefs that are holding them back? And how can we really show that we are the guide who can help them achieve the transformation that they want and solve the problems that they're experiencing in their life? So it's a huge opportunity and responsibility, really. So this is why I love all this and I take it all so seriously, because it truly is a make or break thing, right? It's going to either keep them listening or not.
Yeah.
And so, it was interesting, earlier today, I was looking at your comment on my feedback request in the Facebook group in your program.
Yeah.
And you added something that I had just completely forgot, which is going to be so ironic when I tell you what the first segment is that you need to have in your episode. But it's a hook.
Yeah.
It's a teaser. And I had submitted this post for feedback, and I was like, hey, can you give me some feedback? I want to turn this into video content. And you're like, yeah, I would add this hook at the beginning.
Right.
And I was like, oh, duh, of course. We need the hook, right? We need to give people a reason to read or to listen in this case.
Yeah.
And so what I always tell people, I'm like, you got to open up with a 30-second or less teaser, right? What are you going to cover in that episode today? And why should someone continue listening? A lot of hosts hit record and they just start talking. And it's suddenly you're like, what are you even talking about? Are we ever going to get to the content? What is this about? And people tune out. And we've got to be able to keep people's attention. And so we need to clearly communicate to them up front. It's another little speed bump in the road for them, checkpoint, if you will, to say like, is this for me? Because all along the way of the whole listening experience, that's subconsciously what your listener's asking. Yeah. Is this relevant for me? So we got to hook them in. So that little teaser or that hook, usually followed by your show intro, right? Your show intro should also let them know that they're in the right place. This is the part that you usually hear, it's pre-recorded, it's set to music, right? It's like your branding intro of your podcast. That should be pretty short too. Your longtime listeners will eventually start to skip it, but your new listeners will want to listen, right? You don't want to ramble on for 2 minutes.
Right.
And then what I like to do is create connection. Before I get into the meat of the episode, I use what I call the personal segue. And this is where I tell maybe a 3 to 5 minute either personal story or story about a client, or maybe it was something that happened to me in the grocery store last week, but it relates to the topic of that episode. And I use that time to create deeper connection with my listener, because I know that my listener who is listening at every moment, again, they're asking, is this relevant?
Right.
And do I trust this person? And so telling that little personal story in there allows you to be able to share who you are, what you value. Again, a lot of this is completely unconscious. But if I'm telling a story about how my 5-year-old had to stay home from camp this week, and I was struggling, between the tug of war, taking care of him, do I give attention to my business? I really want to spend quality time with him, right? And just use that as an example to tie into this, whatever. Let's say the main topic I'm talking about is overcommitment, right? On your calendar, not having enough white space, let's just say. That connects people to me. They see I'm a mom. They see that I value family. They see that I value quality time with my son. I'm not just like, camp's over. Okay, let me call a babysitter and, work all day long, right? And it's just because that's what I value. Yeah. And so my listeners are going to see that too. So it helps to create that deeper connection.
So I love that. And I love the teaser because we always open our episodes with some sort of intro, which is where I try to do that. But I wasn't intentionally sitting there going like, okay, I need to hook people in. It's more of like, okay, let me just talk about what we're about to talk about. But now I'm even more intentional with it. And the way I always do it is just kind of like, look, are you dealing with this? Is this a problem that you've had? You've likely been doing this, and we work together, so you understand the problem and the mistakes. I always try to incorporate problem, mistake, and that usually leads to a pretty good hook. But I think I can do a better job with the personal segue and connection, because I kind of do it, kind of don't. But I now see what you're saying is like, it's what we talk about with messaging. It's like we have to release our values. We have to release our beliefs to form that connection. And you're intentionally doing that. What I love about the way you do it is it's like through story. It's like I'm using story to release values. So instead of saying, here's my value, you use the story to demonstrate the value, and people can get that subconsciously. So that makes a lot of sense. Did I sum that up pretty nicely? Or is it
very nicely, better than I could have? Gosh, that was great.
Awesome.
Also, I will say this too, that personal connection piece, it's your listener, the trust. And I just want to zoom out for a minute here. If we were to look at this, with a macro lens, for most people, at least the ones that we work with anyway, they're those heart-centered entrepreneurs that are here to make a difference in the world, right? They want to leave a legacy. They want to make an impact. The money doesn't motivate them. Yeah, they want, to have a successful business and, keep the lights on and all that kind of stuff, but they're not like just money hungry. Right. And so for these people, it is all the more important that if you want to make an impact with your message, with your voice, to catalyze positive change in the world, there's no better place to do that than with a podcast. Yeah. And the trust that you can develop with your listener is what's going to lead to the sales, the revenue, the traffic that you get, the leads that you get from your podcast. It all ties back to this element of trust, which we know this as business owners, that's super important. Right. But if you omit that, that segue, for example, or you just kind of dive right into your content and you're always teaching, you're actually missing out on that opportunity that your listener needs to connect with you.
Totally. And that's what I love that's what I love about the process that you're bringing people through. But also what I love about podcasts is that when it comes to messaging, I always tell our audience, like, look, there's certain elements that need to happen in order for a sale to happen. So it's like the two types of trust. We need connection. We need to have like that thought leadership or perspective shifting sort of message. We also need the teaching, the educational, the authority. But my biggest question to people is like, how do you expect to do that in like an image or a 3-minute video? And people are like, always ask me, well, Brendan, how do I incorporate all these into a 3-minute video or an image? I'm like, you don't. You literally need like 5 to 10 short form posts to be able to achieve all of those things. And so messaging is something that people have to sit in your ecosystem for a while. However, with a podcast, you can start to do that because you have 30, 40 minutes, an hour of uninterrupted time, hopefully, where people are just like listening to you, and you can incorporate all those different elements, which is what you're talking about right now, is like you have the hooks, you have the connection. And I'm assuming as we dive deeper into like what else we need, I'm sure there's gonna be like the educational, the authority, there's gonna be other things you need. So that's what I personally love about a podcast so much, is that one episode can encompass so many elements of what you need in order for a sale to happen. So with that being said, like after you do the personal segue, the connection, what else needs to go into an episode to make it high converting or engaging?
Yeah. So after that segue, this is what I call your body content. Okay. This is your opportunity to shine as the expert. And so this is where, and I know your listeners know about like thought reversals, right? This is a beautiful place to plug those in. This is a place where you can bust beliefs. This is where you can show people the old way of doing something that you think they shouldn't be doing it that way, right? And here's the new way, and help shift perspective. You can use these as teaching moments. If you had something that comes to you, a lot of my episode content for our solo episodes comes to me when I'm journaling. Or I'm on a walk and I'm just jotting down ideas that just kind of come through. And there was one, actually, I'm going to record this weekend on, the 2 deadly sins of entrepreneurship, this overthinking and overcommitting that we do to ourselves as business owners. And so that is where, you have that opportunity to showcase your expertise, right? It builds your authority, your credibility, and reinforces that trust for your listener in you, that you are the person to help them, that you're the person who knows what they're talking about. And so that's the meat of your episode. And there's a variety of ways, we have several ways that we teach our clients how to structure that, but that's essentially what's going on in that middle section. That's the meat of that episode.
Okay.
Then after that, I bookend it with more connection. So if you're following along, so far we've had a teaser, we've had your intro track, you've given that first connection bookend, which is your personal segue. You've delivered tons of value by helping shift perspective. And then we're going to bookend that with more connection. And we're going to invite your listeners to connect with you off of the podcasting platform. Because that's the one thing, Brandon, you know this as a podcast host, we don't know who's listening.
No.
We don't see their name in our DMs. There's nowhere for them to comment on that episode and ask a question or leave feedback. We know they're listening because we can see the downloads, but we don't know who they are. And so I like to invite them into my world. Like, look, I hang out on Instagram every week. I'm there sharing content, on how to launch a podcast, how to make it successful. Come hang out with me. Send me a DM. Let me know what jumped out to you about this episode. What was your biggest takeaway? And I'm always telling my listeners to do that, right? And you just send them to your main platform, right? Whether it's LinkedIn, Instagram, or join your email list, join you for, well, no, that'll come next in the call to action. I was going to say join you for a workshop. But I call this section the call to engage. And this is really what you're asking them to do is, it's a soft call to action, but it's like, hey, come connect with me. I'm a real person. Let's hang out. So that follows your body content. And then you give your call to action. Because by now, if you've done a good job in your body content, they should be curious. They should have the desire, and they should have some sort of internal urgency already created, that demand for what you're going to give them, what action you're going to give them. So whether that's to download something, this is more of your hard call to action, right? It could be to make a purchase. Maybe you're an author and it's like, hey, go buy my book where I go into this in detail, or register for our upcoming workshop, or book a call with me. If this is a real problem that you're struggling with and you want help, let's talk about it. So that's where you give that call to action. And then we don't just end the episode, we tease the next episode. So of course, this does require that you've planned a little bit ahead, right? You know what's coming up the next week, but we want to open a loop in our listeners' mind that they have to listen next week to close.
So smart. Love that.
And that's what keeps them coming back. So if you were to go listen to my podcast, it's called Anti-Fragile Entrepreneurship. You can find it everywhere. You will hear these segments in any episode, whether it's solo or guest, because the guest interview just takes the place of the body content, right? It just gets plugged in. Everything else stays the same. And you will literally hear this at work. And once you hear it, you won't be able to unhear it. But that is the process, right? And what this does is very strategic to create demand, to create desire, and to help you not just attract listeners and keep them listening, but to convert them. Because at the end of the day, that's what the high converting content system is. It's a system to attract, keep, and convert your listeners.
I love that. So I need to do a better job of the teasing, which means I need to do a better job of the planning, because I literally just like, all right, what do I want to talk about this week? And I, very similar to you, like journal, or I'll go for a walk and let the idea come to me. And I usually just do it on a week-to-week basis, but if I plan it out a little bit more, I can do that. So it's super smart. Absolutely love that. And then the last pillar is kind of like ongoing growth. Is that kind of tied into high converting content, or is there something else to, like, once you're up and running, to continue the growth? Are there any sort of like things to focus on there?
Yes. So I love that you asked this, because the high converting content is definitely going to play a role in your long-term growth. Again, going back to that Facebook ad example, if you're not able to keep the listeners who are coming to your show, it's kind of like having a leaky bucket, right? If those listeners are always falling out because you got holes in your bucket, it's going to be very hard to grow. So first, we want to make sure we've got a non-holy bucket. That is what your high converting content system takes care of. Then we launch it, because what that does is it gives you instant credibility for your show. It gives you that social proof, gives you a chance to land in the charts, which is going to help improve your visibility and discoverability and get in front of new audiences. And then the goal from there is to keep charting. Because if I were to pull up Apple Podcasts on my computer right now, and you pick any category, scroll all the way to the bottom, what you're going to see is a total of 200 podcasts. Okay. That's it. There might be thousands. Let's just pick the business category. There might be thousands upon thousands of podcasts in the business category, but you will only ever see the top 200 on Apple. So podcasting starting to do a better job of being more searchable, right? But it's not Google. It's not YouTube. So unless someone knows you or they're looking specifically for your type of content. This is why the name is so important, right? Put a keyword in there if you can. Online marketing made easy, like that's strategic too, because someone might be typing in online marketing and what's going to pop up? Oh, Amy Porterfield. Great. Let me go listen. So that's important, because if you're not ranking consistently, then how do you grow the show, right? And this is what usually trips people up. And we'll get people who come to us and they're like, Courtney, I've been podcasting for 6 months, for a year, for 2 years, however often, right? They've stuck with it, but they're like, I am still only getting 30 downloads an episode, 50 downloads an episode. You know, I might get a new review every month or two, maybe. People tell me they love the show, but I can't grow it. I can't get past, you know, even for some of them, it's even 100 downloads per episode, right? And that's frustrating for how much time and heart that goes into a podcast. You know, that is really frustrating for people. So long-term growth has to do with a couple of things. It has to do with, like I mentioned, continuing to rank, which guess what? You just launched. And if you ranked, then you know how many downloads it took to rank. That becomes your new benchmark. That becomes the download goal to start working toward so that you can rank consistently. That's number one. But then how do we actually drive traffic, right? And I'll hear this from people too. I'm like, so what are you doing to drive traffic to your show right now? And they're like, well, I'm posting about it on social media, emailing my list about it when I remember. I'm asking my guests to share the show. A lot of them don't. I'm thinking about running some Facebook ads. I don't know. I mean, I tell people about my podcast, but I don't know. Like, what else do I need to be doing, right? I'll be a guest on shows sometimes, but I can't say that I've gotten any new listeners from that. So I'm like, all right, here's what we need to do. First, we need to back up and we need to look at the different ways to potentially drive traffic to a podcast. Then, based on your specific goals for your show, we need to come up with a strategy for what are the best ways that you need to focus on. Because it's going to look different for everyone. So, I mean, there's over 20 ways that you could potentially drive traffic, but we focus on 7 foundational elements. So first is podcast directories. Okay. Podcast directories are the lowest hanging fruit. And a lot of people, it blows my mind. And it actually makes me sad because a lot of existing podcast hosts don't even know what I'm talking about when I say that. So a podcast directory is somewhere that releases your podcast to the public. So your big directories are Apple, Spotify, Google, but there's a lot of small ones too. And there's a lot of them that are popular in some countries, but maybe not here in the US where I'm based, or, you know, it might be popular in Europe or India or somewhere. So you want to make sure that your podcast is listed on every directory that it possibly can be. It's free to be listed there. So why wouldn't you be? And often, depending on who's hosting your podcast, right? Whether you host through Libsyn or Buzzsprout or whoever hosts that RSS feed, it's usually a click of a button and they will submit your show to those directories for you. Gotcha. So get it listed as everywhere that you can. The next thing is website traffic. So website traffic is something that is often overlooked too. Chances are, if you're a business owner, you have a website. And you might want to put your podcast on your website, but a lot of people will say, okay, this is a lot of work because now I have to create a new blog page for every episode, like duplicate publish this content, right? We're pushing it out here in our podcast feed. And now I got to have someone or have my VA like put this on my website too. And it can become very tedious and time consuming and almost seem like more trouble than it's worth. I'm going to plug a tool that we love called Podpage. And what Podpage does is it's a website platform that is built for podcasters. You connect your RSS feed to it, you pick a template, and it will automatically import every single episode, create a beautiful episode page for that episode, gives you all kinds of tools to capture traffic that's finding you. And it was built by a guy who worked at Google. So a lot of the SEO type of stuff, which usually tends to make our eyes cross and just make us want to go like hide under a pillow. It's all built in. So if you have a podcast and you don't have a pod page, please go set this up. It's extremely affordable. And then what you can do is you can just link at the top bar of your existing website, podcast, add it to your menu, and then link to your pod page. This will give you dual web exposure because you'll have your existing site and you'll have your podcast site. They'll be connected, so you get those backlinks, which Google loves. And you can also extend your exposure, so to speak, and give people who are searching for keywords, your episode might pop up in their search. They'll find you that way, and then they'll get back to your main website, or vice versa. If they're visiting your main website and they click through the podcast, then they'll land on that page and they'll see you there. So if you want to check out our pod page, you can go to antifragileentrepreneurship.co. I dare you, just go look. We didn't build this site. We used to do it the old fashioned, very time consuming way. We're create a blog post for every episode. But website traffic is another underrated strategy for getting people to your podcast.
Okay, cool.
So those are two that are the lowest hanging fruit. Then we've got a few more. There's short form content. There's email marketing. There's SEO. And there's podcast guesting. There's also guest promotion. That kind of falls into number 7, right? I mentioned there were 7. But these are the ones that we, tend to say, okay, if you're going to focus on anything, focus on layering in each of these until you have your strategy dialed in. And then you can start adding some of the more advanced stuff like paid advertising or ad swaps or joining a network or brand partnerships or industry events. There's a ton of things you could do, cross promotions. Yeah. But these are the ones that I say every podcast host needs to get dialed in first.
Yeah. I mean, I love all these. Some of them we haven't been doing, which I'm sure as my team listens to this, we'll start doing. One that has worked really well for us as well is incorporating episodes into our launches. So my philosophy has always been if we're going to do lead generation 4 weeks out from our launch and we're going to spend $100,000-$200,000, let's use that traffic to grow the podcast. And so every time we launch, when they opt in for something, it's go listen to this to prepare for the live training, this episode. And then we just see a huge spike in downloads. And then it comes down a little bit after launch, but I would say 80% of them actually stick. And that's how we've grown our podcast over the last 2 years, is just by incorporating it into the marketing we've already done, is preparation for webinars or preparation, or even after a training, hey, if you love that training, this episode would be really helpful for you. Do you guys do anything like that as well? Incorporate it into current marketing or anything along those lines?
That's awesome. That's definitely one that would fall into that advanced, the advanced bucket. And I say that because for us, we don't do live launches anymore. We used to be totally launch based, but now we're evergreen. And so that's changed a bit for us. So we don't actually have the opportunity to plug it into a live launch. And I think if you do that, that is genius. I mean, why not? Right. Because the traffic's already coming for the launch. So send them to the podcast too. I mean, that's the definition of leverage right there.
We're moving to evergreen as an open enrollment too. And so part of me is kind of no, because now our podcast growth strategy is it won't happen as much anymore. We still might do it 1 launch per year, but anyways, we're getting there. Okay, great. So just to sum everything up, let me just kind of look at my notes here. We talked about when you start, you want to prepare people, get the date. You want to build momentum, use your audience, all of that good stuff. One thing I forgot to ask you about when we launch, how many episodes should we launch with? Is there a certain amount of episodes, 1 episode, 4, 5, 10? Is there a certain number of what you should be doing when you first launch?
Yeah, great question. So this is what I recommend. If you're wanting to launch a podcast and already now that downloads drive rankings, then what I recommend is that you launch with as many episodes as you can comfortably launch with. I know that's not an exact number. For most of our clients if you want exact figures, that's usually between 5 and 10 episodes. You don't want to burn yourself out before you get started, right? Don't recommend that, because this is something that you're going to have to stay consistent with. But if you launch with one episode, and let's say, it's simple math at this point, let's say you have 50 people in your community who have given you their commitment that they will support the show on launch day. And we didn't dive too much into this, but that commitment's really important. You got to get their yes, yes, I will support you. So let's say you got 50 people supporting you and you release one episode. Well, that's about 50 downloads. If you release 10 episodes, it's 500.
It's so smart,
right? So that is just simple math at that point. But that is, what are your launch goals? How many downloads do you want? And then how does that math break down for you to know how many people you need to have in your launch community and how many episodes you need to release to comfortably hit those numbers? Have I seen people launch with 2 episodes and still rank? Yes, it can be done, but it does depend on a variety of factors. It depends on how competitive your specific category is. Some of the more competitive categories are definitely business, marketing, fitness, finance, right? Those are like super competitive. So you may have to shoot, beyond the moon to hit your goals with those, right? You usually say shoot for the moon, land among the stars, right? You might have to shoot a little further just because going into it, your category is more competitive. If you have a less competitive category, right? Maybe you're in like visual arts or something, right? History, sure, there's plenty of podcasts in those categories, but it's not as competitive. Doesn't mean take your foot off the gas, but it also is a factor, right? You can consider that. So yeah, I would say launch with as many episodes as you comfortably can and have at least 2 to 3 episodes batched out, ready to go post-launch, because you're going to want that breather. If you've ever launched anything, whether it's a program or a podcast, after the launch, when that adrenaline lets off, you're like, whew, I'm tired. You need a day, you need a couple days. So, if you launch and you have this amazing launch and then suddenly you have to turn around and record another episode, just consider your energy, consider your capacity. It's nice to have a couple episodes back.
That makes a lot of sense. And it's like, look, if you're going to launch, don't make it harder on yourself than it needs to be. And having more episodes is going to make it a lot easier. And what I've always realized too is your first 5 episodes, even 10, aren't going to be as good as the next 10 because you're going to get better and better. So it's kind of like if you just launch with 5, you kind of get the jitters out and you get comfortable with it. Then when people come back after the launch release, now your episodes are even more fire than they were before, which I would imagine helps carry that momentum as well. So I love that. And then we talked about high converting content. So we start with that sort of teaser or hook in the beginning, 30 seconds, personal story or the personal segue, which moves into the body content. Then we do another connection and call to action. Is that correct? Then leave anything out there?
Mm-hmm. Yep. And then upcoming episode teaser.
Yeah.
Don't forget that one. Yeah, because you want to hook those listeners to come back. Keep them coming back.
And then we talked about the ongoing success. You have 7 kind of elements to go through. I don't know if I'm going to nail all of them, but we had podcast guesting, SEO, podcast directories, website traffic, using short form content, email marketing, and stuff like that, which I think is all great. Those cover.
Yeah. And look, can I add, Brandon? Yeah. Can I add to that real quick? For those listening who have a podcast, and if you're listening and you're frustrated because your show isn't giving you the results that you want out of it yet, you're not getting the downloads you want, right? You're not meeting your goals. I would say focus in on first, just make sure you're on all the directories because it's so easy and it'll take you 15 minutes to do. Second, make sure you're emailing your list every week. And your email should be structured the same way as your episode. You should hook people in. You should give them a quick summary, bullet points of why they should listen, and then give them a call to action to go listen. That's really important. We have noticed when we don't send those emails, it does directly impact our downloads. Okay. And it might impact them just a little, but a little bit over a lot of time is a lot of negative impact. So those 2 things are super important. And then if you want to throw a third one in there, I would say, aside from anything else, focus on podcast guesting. Cool. We didn't talk a whole lot about this, but think about it. A lot of people say, okay, I'm going to post on social media, and they repurpose their content and they try to get it out there on social media. And what they don't realize is that to drive traffic to long form content, like a podcast, with short form content like social media, there's a strategy that has to go into it. It's not as simple as just taking a clip and posting it to your Instagram, like a clip from the episode. Most people won't pay attention to that. So it requires a little more strategy. And honestly, the people who are on short form platforms are not going to be likely to go jump over and listen to a 30-minute podcast episode.
Interesting. Okay.
They're on the short form platform to consume short form content. It doesn't mean they don't listen to podcasts, but that's what they're on the platform for. So I always say, go where the listeners already are. Where are your listeners? They're listening to other
that makes
podcasts.
Sense.
So if you can guest, this is I'll do 8, 10, 12 podcast interviews as a guest every month. I love it. That's probably a lot for some people, but I could do this all day. Like this is my thing. I love this. But even if you're just doing one a week,
right.
It's better than none. Do 2 a month. I don't care. Pick your number, but get in front of where your listeners are already listening. And I guarantee you will see a greater impact, even over SEO or website traffic or, anything else that you could be doing. That's the lowest hanging fruit. It'll give you the most impact the fastest.
It's really interesting about the short form content because that's what we do is we obviously film it as video and we put it onto our Instagram. And originally our thought was like, well, let's put the podcast content on Instagram and they'll come over like listen. And that hasn't really been the case. What we've saw more of is it wasn't that we would take Instagram following and move them over to the podcast. It was more of we let the podcast be a content creator for our Instagram following. And that's what it turned into is like, okay, let's just use the podcast as a content generator. It's going to give us stuff to keep our IG people or Instagram people happy. Or what it's done is it's just provided as a reminder to current listeners who also follow us on Instagram, there was a new episode. So it'd be more of like, oh, really cool. Sounds interesting. Can't wait to give it a listen or something like that. But like they have already been listeners and it was just kind of like another reminder. Hey, the episode got released this week. So that's been kind of our experience. I'm glad to know that that's like normal is like short form isn't necessarily going to be a podcast grower per se. Cause that's kind of what we've experienced as well.
Right. And I'm glad you said that. I have this visual. So use your imagination with me here. Okay. So I want you to imagine a funnel and I want you to imagine your podcast is at the top of that funnel. Okay. It's positioned at the top. Underneath that are JV partnerships, your live launches, sales, email list growth, right? All of those direct conversions fall under that. Above that are all of your short form content platforms. So if you're looking at this image on my screen, if you were to look at this, you would see like all the little short form content platforms, podcast, then all of your conversion stuff, sales, leads. Your podcast is going to be the driver of those sales and leads because of the trust that it can create in so short a time. Someone now has to spend, I think I read, over 7 hours with you before making a purchasing decision. That is a lot of TikTok videos. It's a lot of Instagram reels, So it's only a few podcast episodes. That's going to be your main driver. And just like you said, Brandon, I just want to make sure people hear this, is that it will also become the source of all the other content you create. So it will cut your marketing time in half because no longer are you trying to come up with 3 different types of content for 12 different platforms that you have to post 24 times a week. It's just you come up with your podcast episode and then you can cut that up into your short form content. I don't mean repurpose like a clip. I mean, there's a strategic way to do it, but I mean, use it as the basis for your short form content. Just like the example earlier, I said when I posted in the Facebook group today, and I'm like, here's the email I want to send out, but I also want to send this for a video. And you're like, cool, send this as an email, shorten it like this for the video. Gotcha. Same kind of thing.
Okay. That makes a lot of sense. So this has been like, even for me, I'm picking up a lot of tips and we've been podcasting for 4 years and I learned a lot just from this episode as well. And I know you offer way more. You have a ton more strategies on all this stuff. I'm sure you have frameworks and processes for titles and content and all that stuff. So where can people go to learn more about you or like, what are your social handles? Do you have any workshops coming up? All that good stuff. Plug away, my friend, plug away.
Yeah. Absolutely. So we host a workshop every month. Usually it's every 3 weeks or so, where I will walk you through this entire process, literally everything you need to launch an Apple Top 100 podcast. There's no pitch to this workshop. This is not some big sales pitch. This is just me showing you what's worked for me and dozens and dozens and dozens of the clients we've worked with. So if you've listened to this episode and you're like, wow, okay, this kind of blew my mind. I didn't know there was so much to it, but you're also kind of feeling excited because you're like, okay, I can do this, right? Like there's a process to it. There's a strategy. Give me the strategy. Then come join me for the workshop. The link to find out all the information for the next upcoming workshop, it's a live page. We keep this up to date with the latest workshop information. So you always have the latest date and time, is antifragileentrepreneurship.co.workshop. So antifragileentrepreneurship.co/workshop. And then my podcast is where you can come connect with me. It's Anti-Fragile Entrepreneurship. And really the whole ethos and basis for our podcast is, we talk about podcasting on the podcast. We talk about marketing psychology. We talk about business. We talk about, your mindset and all the things that make us work as entrepreneurs, right? All the ingredients that we need to be successful. But we do it from a completely different perspective than most business podcasts do. Because most business podcasts are talking about how to succeed and what you need to do in order to have success and make more money and generate leads. And yes, all those things are important and they're helpful and they're valuable. But what I am most fascinated in the world, and in the world of entrepreneurship especially, is learning how to fail better. And that's what anti-fragility is about. How do we, as entrepreneurs, grow through what we go through on this journey of entrepreneurship? How do we navigate the downs, the ups, the highs, the lows, the adversity, the diagnosis that you didn't see coming, or a week of school that your kid is out, right? And you're like, how am I going to juggle this, right? It could be the big stuff, the little stuff, but it's the stuff we all face. So that's what my podcast is dedicated to, and helping you succeed through failing better. So I'd love for you to come check that out. And then, of course, if you're on Instagram, if you're on LinkedIn, just type in my name, look me up. I would love to connect with you there, at Courtney Elmer on LinkedIn and at the Courtney Elmer on Instagram, because surprisingly, there's like 12 other Courtney Elmers. Who knew?
Same with me. I had to go with I am Brandon Lucero because we waited too long to get the handle on Instagram. And what bugs me the most is the person who has the Brandon Lucero handle has nothing posted. There's no content. There's like no description. It's someone who just signed up and then never used Instagram. And I'm like, no.
Oh my gosh.
But anyways, so guys, go check her out. Courtney Elmer on Instagram, LinkedIn, and then Anti-Fragile entrepreneurship.co/workshop, or that is also Anti-Fragile Entrepreneurship is the name of the podcast as well. So go check her out. If you found anything interesting today and you're like, okay, I really need to learn more about this and launch my podcast, or even my podcast has been plateaued and I need to grow it, go check out her workshop. Courtney, thank you so much for being here and spending over an hour with us today. I'm really grateful for your time and you sharing your expertise. So thank you.
Thank you, Brandon, for having me. This has been fun.
Yeah. Of course. All right, guys. I don't know what the next episode is, so I can't give you a teaser, unfortunately, but it's going to be awesome. I promise you. So make sure you come back next week for another episode, and I'll talk to you guys all later. Take care. Hey guys, thank you so much for checking out another episode of the New Generation Entrepreneur Podcast. If you enjoyed this episode, go below, hit the subscribe button, and make sure you click on that bell icon and get notified every time we drop a new episode. Now, if you're looking for the show notes, we have them linked underneath this video, as well as our social media handles and some links to free training and offers that we drop from time to time to help you guys even further. So go check those out if you're interested, and thank you so much for tuning in to the New Generation Entrepreneur Podcast.